Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dungeon Dive. Daniel here, and today I am doing my review for Hellboy the board game. Here it is, finally got my Kickstarter. This is going to be kind of an interesting review because even though I think this is an amazing game, I absolutely love it, I am having a hard time recommending it to anyone who didn't get the Kickstarter. More so than just about any game I can think of, the discrepancy between the base pledge on Kickstarter and the retail version is it's huge, a huge discrepancy between the two versions of the game. So much so that I can easily recommend people buy and play the Kickstarter version, but I really cannot recommend the same for the retail version unless you are prepared to spend a lot more money on the base game and the expansions when they do hit retail. And as I go through the game and we look at the components and talk about the game a bit, you'll see what I mean when I say that. So let's review. I had the game all set up. I've been playing it over and over again for the last week. I've played about 5 games, I think. I've ran through the tutorial scenario twice, and then I've ran through 3 of the randomly generated scenarios. And I had everything all set up, and I had a review done yesterday, but it didn't turn out very good. So I boxed everything up, and I wasn't able to get everything out on the table again to show like what it looks like set up, but we'll kind of show that as we're going and as we're talking about the game and all the stuff you get. So just keep in mind that everything good I say about this game is really going to come down to having the Kickstarter. And so I'm actually not sure who this video is for, because if you already have the Kickstarter and you're watching this, then I guess I'm just here to reinforce the idea that, hey, you backed a good game, congratulations. And then, you know, the people who didn't, they're going to be like, oh man, this game sounds awesome, but I really can't recommend the retail version. So it's a little weird. It's a little bit in this like kind of gray area. But let's get into the game and talk about some stuff. So first thing we're going to do is the Dungeon Dive patented examination of the size of the rulebook. So this is my favorite size of rulebook. I wish more games had their rules in this comic book size. It's so easy to read and hold. It doesn't take up a ton of space. The pages don't flop over if you're holding it in your lap. You can easily read this on the bus without the pages flopping over into your neighbor's seat. And just to show you the 2 extremes, here's the Fire Team Zero rulebook. It doesn't even fit on the frame of my iPhone. And you can just see, I mean, just like reading through this, the pages are just flopping all over the place. You have to kind of hold the pages or bend them a little bit to read the different columns. It's so unwieldy, whereas something like this is perfect. And I know that's really silly, and no other reviewers ever really talk about the size of the rulebook, but for me, it's something that I think it just kind of shows that the designers, the publishers, that they paid attention and they took care of how everything fits together. And one of the reasons why a comic book size is so perfect for Hellboy is because it's based on a comic book. So already just the size of the rulebook is showing you the commitment to the theme. And that is super cool. And speaking of the comics, so the past year I've been spending quite a bit of time reading through the comics, and I'm just started the Conqueror Worm trade. So I know that expansion is included in here. And it has quickly become one of my all-time favorite comic books. I am ashamed that I haven't read it until now, until 44 years old. Even when I was a book sale manager at Tower Records, I always kept Hellboy in stock and it always sold, and I just never read it. And I don't know why, but it's fantastic. So if you haven't read it yet, I highly recommend you do so. I did see the 2 Guillermo del Toro movies, and I didn't really care for them. I don't really care for him as a director. I have a lot of problems with his movies, but I thought some of the performances were okay. I just thought it was really, they were oddly paced. I think that was some of the issues I had with them. But anyway, so that's kind of like my background with Hellboy. Reading the comics now, absolutely loving them, getting a ton out of them. And I think the game really does a fantastic job of reinforcing the theme and the characters. So the game, the box is actually quite nice, and you get a lot of very useful trays in the game. And the main tray here, this is kind of like the, this is pretty much all of your components that aren't miniatures or large tiles can all fit in this first tray. And so in these first 2 bags, what you have are your case files. And so these are the scenarios. And they're pretty interesting in the way they work. They will have you'll have a first card that kind of sets up what you're trying to do. And then you'll go through and you'll look to see different ways you want to set up your board, different layouts for the map, different cards you're going to use for that adventure, and then certain things you're going to turn over and discover as you play, as you trigger certain events. And I believe in the base game, so at retail, there are 6 scenarios. And I think there are 2 extras in this Kickstarter version. So that brings it up to 8 scenarios. And I know that doesn't seem like a lot, but there are enough different modular random elements that you can select when you're setting up your scenario, to where I do think that even though there are only 8 in this box, it does lend itself to a lot of variety. But then this stack of case file cards, this is really what had me totally stoked for this game, because these are all cards that you can use to generate random scenarios. I wish that every dungeon crawl like this, every modular dungeon crawl, had a system like this, to where you could just quickly set up and play a game using all of the components that you have without having to rely on a pre-made scenario, or maybe a scenario that you've already played through a handful of times. And the system is it's quite intuitive, and I think it's very well done. So there are 7 elements to a scenario. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to pick your environment, which dictates how long of a scenario you're going to have. You're going to have short, and that's going to be smaller areas like that. You're going to have medium length scenarios, which are going to be a little longer, more involved. And then you're going to have long scenarios. Now, each one of these scenarios, it's going to tell you how to set up your map with the different tiles. And then it's also going to tell you how to set up your Doom deck. Now, the deck of Doom is kind of like think of this as, this is like the narrative deck. This game, of course, was designed by James Hewitt and Sophie Williams. And James Hewitt, you might remember from Warhammer Quest Silver Tower, which is an absolutely fantastic game. One of the best modern crawlers out there, bar none. And this deck of Doom in Hellboy is very reminiscent to the way that you set up your dungeon in Silver Tower. Because as you look at this, you're going to say, okay, so in this scenario, if you're going to play, you want to use all of the deck of Doom cards that have this symbol, plus a special card for each hero that is involved. And then you're going to use one of these random or unexpected threat cards. So the A cards are the unexpected threat cards. And these will introduce kind of like a harder enemy at some point in the game if you run into it, or something a little bit more challenging. And then each of the main heroes has their own Doom card that you're going to put in. That's going to kind of dictate a little bit of the way that they have to play for a while. One thing I really would like to see in this game is an entire expansion filled with nothing but Doom cards for the various heroes. You know, if you had 10 or 12 different cards for Hellboy, then each time you play you can mix in a random one. That would add a ton of variety and a little personal touch to each quest. But then you're also going to go through and you're going to find, you know, all the cards with this green runic symbol. And then those are going to do certain things as you draw them in the Doom phase. So for instance, this one is Poltergeist Activity. Put this card in play. Each time an agent enters an area that contains scenery, roll an orange die. On a score of 2, discard the scenery. The agent takes damage equal to its size. Discard this card when the agents take time. So Poltergeist Activities, there are poltergeists in the area you're exploring, and they're messing around with the scenery. They're throwing couches and bookshelves and that kind of thing. The heroes have to dodge and get out of the way, or you might take some damage. So a lot of the elements in this game are thematic, but they are vague enough or simulated enough, just abstracted enough. That's the word I was looking for. They are abstracted just enough that it kind of requires the players to use their imagination to fill in some of the blanks. And I like that. You know, it's not dictating you what you're doing, but the card's name, kind of what happens, and then of course the amazing art on all of these. It gives you an idea, something you can imagine. For instance, one of the cards here, I can't remember how it triggered, but there was a portal that was opened up on one of the tiles. And to close the portal, if you didn't close the portal, monsters were constantly pouring through. And to close it, you had to take a rest action. And it doesn't sound like, well, how is resting going to close a portal? We just had to think about it a little bit. So you had to take, so like the heroes had to take time out of their investigation, out of fighting, in order maybe to do a little ritual, find a manuscript, or do something to close the portal. So this game does require the players to put in a little effort to unearth the great theme. And I like that. It's cool. But they're just all kinds of Doom cards. And these cards are going to have you, most of these are pretty bad. A couple of them are good. But a lot of them are going to have you raise the Doom counter. And so you have this HQ board here, which this is kind of like your operations center for the scenario. Here you're going to have your Doom track, and as that goes up, the chance of the big bad coming out and fighting is higher. So there are basically, every scenario has kind of like an investigation phase where you're going through looking for clues. You're going to be fighting, and it's going to have a boss fight, and there's going to be 2 or 3 ways to trigger the confrontation with the boss. One way is you discover all the clues. Another way is all the heroes are knocked out at the same time, and then the boss kind of comes out of nowhere. That happens a lot in the comic book, where, you know, Hellboy will get knocked out and then find that he's been kidnapped by some crazy monster or cult or something, and he wakes up, you know, with the big bad breathing down his neck, getting ready to pummel him. Or you run out of time, and that's another way that you're going to trigger the confrontation. And then you have your insight, and this is how you get clues. You have your what is that? The not the initiative track, but the target track, target priority track. This is for each hero you play. You're going to put a little marker here, and whenever you have to decide who is the target, it's always going to be the person in this spot. And as soon as they become the target, they move to the back. So you're going to be manipulating this a lot. Down here is where you're going to put your enemy cards. It tells you what minions you're fighting. Here you're going to put your case files, your case cards. Then up here is the in-play area where you're going to put all the cards that have special ongoing rules for each scenario. So it's a really useful way to keep track of all the things that are going on in the game. Anyway, so that was a really long way of showing this first short card here. The second element that you're going to do is your investigation. And so this is going to dictate what kind of enemies you're going, or not the, how you're going to set up your encounter deck, and how you're going to set up your insight and your doom track, and basically any key rules that you're going to have on your investigation. And then you're going to set up your threat. And this is where you're going to pick what kind of enemies you want to fight, and what kind of, how long you're going to have on your doom track. Now the enemy section, this is one of the areas where the retail version falls incredibly short. So I'm not going to show you the exact cards, but in the retail version, you're going to get 1, 2, 3, 4 enemies only. And they're all going to be the same. They're all going to be frogmen, different kinds of frogmen, but you're only going to get 1 enemy type, and you're going to get 3 bosses. So you're going to get 7 enemy cards in the retail version. This is how many enemy cards additionally you get in the Kickstarter version. That is exponentially more. So I would be so disappointed if I bought this game retail, got it home, opened it up, only to find that there was only 1 type of enemy in the entire game. Enemy variety, I think, is a huge part of these games. In order to keep things interesting, you need to be fighting different types of creatures, at least in my opinion. So, but the enemies you're going to have different bosses. You're going to have kind of fiends, or like mini bosses. They're going to have how much they move, their armor, their health, how much damage they do on range attack, or their range, what the range is, how much damage they do on range attacks, how much damage they do on melee attacks. It's going to have a little special rule, and then each one of the enemies, the bosses, is going to have some symbols, a lot like on the Doom cards, but those are going to be used as boss behavior cards. So if you were fighting this boss here, you would look through your boss behavior deck and you would pull out all the cards that have those symbols. And then those are going to have kind of random things that the boss is going to do. Somewhat similar to something like, Kingdom Death Monster, or even the newer Cult of Barnacle Bay. And I like this system. I wish more games use it, and I'm glad that more games are starting to. Just ways to keep the boss's behavior unpredictable. I think it adds a lot to the game. So those are your enemy cards. And then the next part you're going to do is you're going to pick your objective, and that's going to give you a little story and some little more rules about what you're going to do. And then you have your twists. Twists are just like they say, they're weird things that can happen depending usually on how much insight you've discovered, or whether Doom track is, or something happens in the game where a new element is introduced. And then you're going to pick your showdown, and then your confrontation with the boss you're going to fight. So with these cards, and with all of the enemies, and with the boss behavior deck, and with the different encounters, you could play this game for a long time, because you got a ton of encounter cards, and a lot of these will tell you, they'll tell you which minion, different kinds of scenery you might get, or frog swarms, or some sinister birds. Some of these will have different special rules at the bottom. So there is a ton of variety. So even though there are only 6 main quests in the game, do not worry about how much there is to do, because there is a ton of stuff to do. All right, so let's see here. What should we look at next? Well, let's look at the heroes. So the base game comes with, let's see here, 4 heroes, of course. You get Hellboy. I laminated my cards. You get Abe Sapien. You get Johann Kraus and Liz Sherman. So this is going to be a good time to talk about kind of just how the game is played. I'm not going to go into an in-depth talk about the rules, but we can talk about them a little bit. So we're going to bring out this tray here. It's going to have all your frogmen, your dice, your clues. I ended up painting mine a little bit because they were dull gray and they just didn't pop on the board. So I just kind of wanted people to be able to see those. But the dice system is quite interesting. It's unique. So I can get some of these out here. And it's a lot of fun, and it really does add some tension and some interesting mechanisms. So each of the heroes, the main heroes, is going to have 4 stats. They're going to have a fight, melee, ranged, insight, I believe that's called. That's like searching, and then defense. And anytime you take a test, and a test is basically anytime you're rolling the dice, you're going to be fighting, you're going to be blocking, you're going to be shooting, you're going to be investigating, searching. Anything you do as a game, you're going to roll dice. And depending on the color, that dictates what color dice you're going to roll. So Hellboy, if he was making a fight check, and you always roll 3 colored dice. In addition, you always roll 1 blue dice. Now this is kind of like a randomizer dice. This, of course, is bad. If you roll that, you remove your highest rolled color dice. If you roll that, you can re-roll. You can add special bonus or special powers or hits, or you can multiply the best you've rolled. So you roll the dice, and then you look at how many successes you have and counts as successes. And typical, looking at the pips, that kind of thing. However, certain situations in the game are going to call for you to have to roll worse die. So you have to downgrade your die or upgrade the die. So if you were making a melee attack against a certain enemy, but that enemy was surrounded by 2 other enemies, for each enemy it's surrounded by, you would have to remove 2 of the red die and downgrade them to orange. Now you might be looking at something like this at one point. And if you had to downgrade a yellow die, which is like the worst, that goes to nothing. So then you're really hurting. And then red dies, they can be upgraded to black. And those are the most powerful. And so you're kind of constantly looking at ways to boost your dice, to make your, to upgrade your different colors, ways to mitigate the downgrading. And it leads to some really interesting situations. And it's such an easy way to add a dramatic element to the game using dice. I really like it. It does a little bit remind me of a similar system like in something like Stuffed Fables or Comanauts, where you're having different colored dice to do different things. So there does seem to be a group of designers who are thinking about dice in new and interesting ways. So I like that. That is pretty cool. And then also with the Kickstarter, you're going to get a couple more regular heroes. You're going to get Roger and Lobster Johnson. You're going to get the Visitor, and then Horned Hellboy. Oh yeah, let's also take a look real quick at how damage is tracked. So damage is down here. It's kind of hard to see. So Hellboy has 6 hit points. I think that's the most. And as he takes damage, you're going to put these damage counters on his card like this. Fill them up. And these count as wounds. As soon as this track is filled up, the next time you take damage, you start flipping them. And then it dictates penalties to the dice that you're using for your different abilities. And so each one of these is considered an injury. If your track fills up with all wounds and then all those flipped over to injuries, then your hero is knocked out. And as you heal, well, you can heal by flipping these over, and then once they're all flipped over, then you can start removing wounds. So pretty cool little system. I like that. It makes the heroes feel strong because they can take a lot of hits before they're knocked out. And yet it also simulates the comic book. The heroes in the comic book are always just getting their butts kicked and just barely scraping by and getting damaged and hurt, kind of like, Ash in Evil Dead, just getting their butts kicked up and down, left and right. And so having these injuries and having them impact the way you play the game is pretty cool. We should also take a look at each of the heroes has a list of special rules. And these are just different little things that can change the way that the game plays. And then they also have unique actions. So we should talk about the action system. Each hero is going to get 3 action cubes to use on their turn. There's no initiative. You can you can switch intermingle your actions. Hellboy could attack, Ape Sapien could move, Liz could shoot fire, then Hellboy could go. So you're just going to spend your actions on the different things that you can do. And that is, you can move, fight, shoot, examine, interact, and clear. And then there are 2 free actions, trading and exploring. And then each hero, of course, has a listing of unique actions that only they can do. And some of them are, of course, more powerful than the basic actions. And then the Kickstarter version also comes with some bonus heroes. So there are a group of called backup agents, and these are kind of like not the A list. This is the A team. This is kind of like the B team of the BPRD. You're going to have Scott Clark, Trevor Brutenholm, Bud Waller, Kate Corrigan, Pancakes Hellboy, and Sydney Leach. And in a normal game, these are just going to kind of either be in a remote support, which is going to give you a bonus to certain dice checks or certain test, or you can bring them out onto the board as a direct support and have them fight alongside your group of heroes. But in the Kickstarter version, you also get hero cards for those, and you can use them as heroes on the board as player characters. But these guys are quite a bit weaker than the main group, than the A team. And so you can maybe mix some of those in with your A team to add a little bit more, maybe an element of difficulty to the game, that kind of thing. Pretty cool idea. Rounding out the heroes, you're going to have some starting powers and this requisitions deck. So each of the heroes will have 2 different cards that they are their starting cards, and those give them a special item or 2 or a special power. And then depending on how many heroes you're bringing into a mission, you'll get a certain amount of money that you can spend on items or hiring backup agents. And there's all kinds of different things you can buy that will have different elements, different ways to boost your heroes. It's a really neat way of balancing the game for 2 heroes because you're going to have a lot more stuff or more backup agents. And then some of these are double-sided, so they'll have a side, then you flip over, and then you have to use like the weaker side. And some of them do not have a backside. So with this deck, you're always drawing from the bottom. So as you can see, there's quite a bit of variety to the different heroes, to the stuff they can use, to their powers, the monsters, the doom, the boss actions. There's a lot to this game, and when you're playing it, it doesn't feel fiddly. It is mostly a very smooth experience. The rules come with a walkthrough of a intro scenario that walks you through a few turns to learn all of the things that you can do. And the rulebook itself is pretty well laid out. It doesn't have an index, which is a bummer, but it does have this quick reference sheet. And things are somewhat, I would say, logically laid out in the rulebook. So you're not having to check very often, but if you do, it's pretty easy to find. And then we've gone through, what, 30 minutes already. We haven't even touched on the minis. The minis are very good. I do wish that this game had 2D standees because I would love to have more Mike Mignola art, and I think they would look really cool in this game on the tiles, which the tiles do a very good job of simulating his minimalistic background style. But when you put the minis on, the minis have a lot more detail than any Mignola drawing. But they are very good. They're sturdy. They have good detail. And they do make me want to paint them. Who knows if I'll ever get around to it. But if I do paint them, I'm going to try to paint them in a Mignola style where it's mostly blacks with color highlights, because I think that would look really cool putting them on the tiles with that style of art. You know, just lots of big swatches of black and then highlight the colors. Most of the painted minis I've seen from this game have just been in pretty standard mini style, and it looks good because they're good painters, but it doesn't fit with the style of the game. And then the rest of the box is just full of all your minis. There are a ton in the Kickstarter version, and I believe there's even more coming if you ordered the box of evil, which I did not. I just did a base game. You have harpies, you have bats, witches, werewolves, regular wolves, sinister birds. Those guys are absolute bastards. You have your big old tray of bosses here. And these are very well done, very sturdy. They feel good. They've got great detail. I'm very impressed with this game, if you guys can't tell already. And then you have your tray of Nazis to kick their stupid butts. But yeah, that is about it. The game is cool. Oh yeah, tiles. Where'd the tiles go? What did I do with them? Let's see here. So we have the small tiles. So you're going to build your maps using tiles and like that, and you can put little doors in between them to build your rooms and stuff. Some people have complained a little bit about how the tiles kind of look a little boring, and I guess that's somewhat true. They don't look they're not super exciting, but oh, excuse me, sorry about that. But I do think that it matches the style of the comic books. And there really is only 2 environments, so it would have been nice to see some different environments. Hopefully those come with an expansion. But I am super excited about the future of this game. Man, I don't know if the game will have a huge future outside of Kickstarter because of how limited the retail version of the game is. I would love to be able to tell people to go out, buy this game, because selfishly I want to say that so that Mantic makes more. But if people are going to trust my opinion on things, it makes it really hard for me to say, hey, go out and buy the retail version. Because if I were to buy the retail version, I would be disappointed. So if you have purchased the retail version and you're not disappointed, let me know. Maybe I'm completely wrong. Maybe it's not as limited as it first appears. I don't know. But if you do have the Kickstarter version, or you can get it, or you don't mind paying more for the retail version plus the expansions, then I can highly recommend this game. If you already have it, congratulations. You backed a fantastic game that has a ton of great components, very thick theme. It has interesting mechanisms, interesting characters, and an absolute ton of variety to mix and match to create scenarios that you can play for months and months and months. So, all right, that was Hellboy. And I'm going to be playing this game a lot this year. I already know it's going to be set up frequently, and it's going to stay on the table for longer than a lot of games have been. So, all right, guys. Well, hope you liked the video, and we will talk to you later. Bye-bye.